Nanu, nanu.
I never liked that.
Now, you see, half of it is because Pam Dawber, back when she was doing Mork and Mindy, she was quite foxy.
Yeah, she was one of my first crushes.
Because she was quite clean and wholesome. But
Yeah. I really liked Pam Dawber.
Wasn't there something with an egg in Mork and Mindy, or have I dreamed
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
spaceship.
no, there was...
Yeah, I didn't like that.
I don't like her.
yeah.
Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 20th of August. I'm Phil Hinton, and joining me on this edition are Assistant Editor Steve Withers,
Andy Williams, Perry Como, and Certain Ballads by Mr. Frank Sinatra.
News Editor Mark Hodgkinson,
Even encapsulated in 2 seconds, my life is dull. I find that very alarming.
Games Editor Mark Botwright,
Let's boogaloo till we puke.
and Audio Reviewer Ed Selley.
Or we walk up to someone and say, "Are you the enemy?" And if they say yes, we shoot them.
If you haven't caught on to what the quotes are from, it's Good Morning Vietnam, and sadly, as we recorded the podcast last Monday, Robin Williams sadly died, and the news was broken about an hour after we finished recording, so we weren't able to get in last week's podcast, but it seems like a long time ago now, even though it was only last Monday, guys. Bit of a shocker, this one, really.
Yeah, although I'm starting to get used to it now. I think Mr. Botwright pointed out that every week we seem to have somebody who's either died of some disease or a car crash or topped themselves. And another one. I've got to say, massive surprise for me. I guess depression is a difficult thing. I mean, with Tony Scott is another good example where you think someone's career is doing well and everything's great, and then suddenly they go and kill themselves, and you realise maybe things weren't as they appeared to the outside world. But even so, and I know comedians generally are not the most happiest of bunches when they're not on stage or in front of a camera, but that was a real shock that Robin Williams killed himself. Very sad.
I wasn't that shocked by this one. I mean, I was shocked that it happened, but I wasn't shocked he was a sufferer of depression. He always seemed he was one of those guys that's kind of really on the edge and so into what he does, so into the comedy that when he wasn't doing it, I can imagine he did have some dark moments. He was a very special talent.
I think there's a lot to be said about genius and the flaws that come along with genius.
Yeah.
Just thinking about people who, like him, have had massive careers, have changed people's perceptions, have made people laugh, made people cry at the same time. They always seem to have the flip of the coin personality, Ed.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting. Robin Williams' issues with depression were... He never actually made too much of a secret about it, and the inspirational quote machine that is the internet has been busy sticking these quotes onto photos of him looking wistful for the last week, and you realise that there was actually a genuinely... He'd been quite outspoken about it. With that being said, I'm not quite in the Hodgkinson school of inevitability there. I was taken aback because I felt that obviously talking about this from a perspective of not fully understanding it, for which I'm not entirely upset about, it always seemed like he had more of a handle on it due to a degree of openness. But nonetheless, then the ensuing rumours of him being somewhat in the hole financially and very potentially being in the early stages of Parkinson's, I guess it's a cumulative exercise, and I mean, I have to being taken aback when I fired up the various bits and bobs on the Tuesday morning. But yeah, I suppose when you actually start reading about some of the interviews he gave in the last 2 years or so, it's obviously everything's easier with hindsight, but there's more. You can see more of the potential, the underlying, sort of sadness and inner turmoil, for want of a better phrase, that there seemed to be with it. And I guess if we would look at this in the film punditry sense, in terms of knockout roles over the last couple of years, I don't recall anything that Mr. Williams has been in the last 3 or 4 years where he was either...
I can't remember the last 10 or 15 that he's been in anything.
No,
that's
I'd
been...
say he was absolutely superb in Insomnia with Al Pacino, which I think was about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think
Was
that's
it
very good at
24-hour
that.
photo?
Yeah,
it's 1 hour photo,
1
which
hour
is a
photo.
superb
He's
film.
interesting that he was very, for a sort of a zany comedian that we best know him as in his early career. His sort of latter part of his career, when he did things like 1 hour photo and Insomnia, he played dark, disturbing characters extremely well.
I think it was anything where he kind of dialed back that personality seemed to kind of strike a chord with people, because he kind of played the zany character so much with his comedy, that as soon as, like Good Will Hunting or something, as soon as he appeared as a more calm figure, it was either very much the kind of kind benevolence, or when he played things very, very much slower, it was, he played evil very insidiously.
Yeah,
true.
I love 1 hour photo. I think it's. Don't get me wrong. I believe the role that Williams plays is beautifully written, and there are a number of people that could have done it extremely well, but he made that his own. It was the Robin Williams film I felt the greatest urge to watch in a sense of nostalgia. After thinking, what Robin Williams? And that's mainly because I don't have the Mork and Mindy box set, and I bloody love Mork and Mindy. I don't have a problem admitting that. I used to watch that during school holidays on reruns, and I thought it was marvellous.
Okay, well, that's obviously the sad passing of Robin Williams last Monday. After we recorded, otherwise we would have mentioned it. So let's move things on to hardware news. And we had our first, well, I'm saying we, it was Steve, had the first experience of Dolby Atmos in the home. That was last week. Steve's article is up on the front page if you want to go and find out his views in written form, or you can hang a bit here and Steve's going to tell us now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all, certainly I have, and I'm sure a few other people have got quite excited at the concept of Dolby Atmos. It's nice to have a new sound format. The idea of overhead speakers is interesting, a more immersive sound experience. And this was the first chance I'd had to, I've experienced it in the cinema, but the first chance to experience the kind of things we're going to be able to buy ourselves in the very near future, within the next few weeks, in fact. So what they did was they had a series of trailers and clips, and one long clip from Star Trek Into Darkness, which they initially showed us in their 35-seat Dolby Atmos equipped cinema, which they have in their offices in Soho. So they showed us all that stuff first, and of course it sounded amazing. And the idea was we then went to the demo room where they had a more traditional home cinema setup. So they actually had a 7.1 setup, so front, left, and right, and center, side and rears, and a subwoofer. Plus, they also had 4 overhead speakers, so technically 7.1.4. And they also had 4 upward firing speakers, so they could then toggle between the overhead speakers or the upward firing speakers. And the idea was they then showed us exactly the same clips again as we'd seen in the cinema, but this time in the home environment. And they also toggled around between using the overhead speakers and the upward firing speakers, so we could see whether we could tell the difference between the two. And obviously, I'm going to say it wasn't as impressive as being in an actual cinema, but I don't think you can really expect it to be quite the same. I mean, we're talking about, sort of 16 array of overhead speakers, speakers that run all the way around the room, 4 subs, a full massive cinema setup is never going to, you're never going to recreate that with 7 speakers in a home cinema and 4 overheads. But having said that, compared to what I heard in the cinema, it did replicate it extremely well. It was very similar. You had the sense of immersion, you had overhead noise. There was a Dolby produced trailer where there was a forest and there was thunder and lightning and rain coming down, and those kind of very naturalistic effects work really well with Atmos, I think. I mean, presumably that's why it's called Atmos, because it's atmospheric, more so perhaps than just the explosions and things flying around, although that works well as too. I found the Star Trek Into Darkness clip, I enjoyed it more actually on the home cinema setup, because I found it in the cinema, it was overwhelming in terms of its, the sound design, the amount of action, the objects flying around the room, the amount of bass. It was almost punishing at times to watch that, and therefore in a slightly more contained and controlled environment.
That sounds awful.
Well, it was too much. It was like kitchen sink sound design, and it really was excessive, and I just felt like, I don't know, this is too much. And therefore, watching it in the home cinema set, I actually enjoyed it more because it wasn't quite as overbearing as it had been in the cinema.
Yeah, I mean, anything that takes you out of the experience is a bad thing. So if you're really noticing that and it is having that effect on you, then it's bad sound design. It's not good sound design.
But what I did notice, I think, was also that I've seen a few Dolby Atmos movies now, or bits of movies, and you can clearly see, whilst perhaps they got a bit carried away and it was a bit too much, they were clearly getting better at using the concept of object sound design, and using the overhead speakers as well to make the surround more immersive and to move things around in that. But I just felt in the cinema, at least, it was a little bit too much. But great in the demo room, and then they've toggled between the upward firing speakers and the overhead speakers. And I have to say, much to my surprise, the upward firing speakers worked really well. The first two demos, the first two clips they did, they actually were just using the upward firing speakers. They told us they were going to use one and then the other, and which one was which, and which one was tell them which one was which. And I was thinking, first one I thought, yeah, they're using the upward firing speakers. The second one, I wasn't convinced. I thought maybe it was coming from above. In fact, they were both using upward firing speakers. And then they did a test where they could toggle between the two, and they also had a TV screen so you could see a representation of the room, in a sort of grid form, and then it showed you where the objects were moving around the room, and then you could see obviously when the upward firing speakers were being engaged and when the overhead ones were being engaged. But surprisingly effective at creating a sense of sound coming from above, even though they were firing upwards. Now these speakers, they were actually made by KEF, although there will be plenty of other. I mean, this was very much an agnostic demonstration by Dolby. They weren't, there was no particular manufacturer being pushed. It just happened to be they were using KEF speakers this time, but there will be other speakers available. And the idea is that Dolby give the manufacturers the basic technology, license it to them, and then they build their own speakers how they want to, but based upon the technology. And the technology they're using is basically psychoacoustic technology, where if you have someone talking to you in front of you, and obviously the sound hits your ears, both ears at the same time, and you've got someone above you and the sound hits you at the same time, how is it you can tell the difference? And the reason is because the way the sound resonates around your shoulders and around the head. And they've kind of tried to recreate that using these speakers. That's what they claimed. But all I can say is, regardless of the technology involved, certainly it did work. And I was struggling at times to tell which one was which. And that surprised me.
What kind of ceiling was in the demo room?
It was a solid ceiling, but in the middle section there was a kind of a section coming down, which is where they built in the overhead speakers. So I mean, they were aiming them to bounce off of obviously the hard part of the ceiling. But there was a sort of central section, a kind of lower down section, which I guess was a wooden box, effectively, where they built in the overhead speakers. And I did ask them about speaker placement, not just upward firing. Basically, the idea with the upward firing speakers, and it's a clever idea, is most partners probably aren't going to let you put speakers on the ceiling.
Yeah, which was why I was asking that question, because the ceiling is the one area where, unless you have a vaulted ceiling or you live in a cathedral, most people have roughly the same type of ceiling arrangement. So it makes kind of sense that if these speakers work in a certain way that, and like I say, unless you've got a vaulted ceiling or something like that, in most cases it's going to work for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this was an office building. I don't know when it was built, but it's a typical stone building, brick building with your standard ceiling, most of it. So I think in the average house, this is going to work quite well. It's going to bounce off of an average ceiling, unless it's incredibly high, which I doubt it would be. It should work really well. And obviously, you're putting them on top of the speakers that you've already got there. So you're not taking up any additional space. You're running wires along the same way that you're running the wires that are already going to the existing speakers. So in that sense, it makes perfect sense. And from the point of view of Dolby, they understand that. They realise that most people aren't going to be able to put speakers on the ceiling. And therefore, for this system to become popular, or as popular as they hope it will, they realise they need to have an alternative. And so that's why they were very keen to show us the Atmos speakers, because clearly it is an easier solution for people in the average living room. And to my surprise, they actually do work really well. I think anyone who demos them will be surprised at how effective they can be. Certainly the demonstration I have. I
guess the problem is, Steve and Ed and everybody else that's on this podcast, is that who is this technology aimed at? I noticed that the likes of Onkyo have home theatre in a box systems with Dolby Atmos engaged and all the rest of it. Are we seriously saying or suggesting, Ed, that the vast majority of the public is going to get involved with this? Because I don't know about you, but certainly in my last job I went into quite a few people's houses, and people that had home theatres in a box tended to have all 5 speakers up the front next to the TV.
Well, there's an element of that there, isn't there? The upward firing aspect is quite clever, though, because any speaker manufacturer feeling bold, if they're feeling timid, they can at least produce a matching stick-on Atmos upward firing speaker to complement floor standards, stand mounts, etc. If someone really wants to steal a march, they can produce a speaker package where that tweeter array is built in from the outset. And it's just going to, as Steve says, it's going to generate a level of accessibility that insisting that people cut 2 or 4 holes into their ceiling just isn't. And yeah, from a speaker manufacturer perspective, provided that the licensing isn't grossly prohibitive, and we don't know anything about that yet, and also provided that the standards are, I wouldn't say lax, but the standards are, they don't require you to go down a very, very specific path and produce a very, very specific sound, because I don't think that that's constructive either. I think this could be, it could be the difference between Atmos being a complete non-starter and actually having some traction. And I don't think it just needs to be home theatre in a box. And I do agree with you that you go in and you see speakers arranged in some truly remarkable layouts, and often with some decidedly interesting level settings as well. But again, it won't hurt. And let's face it, if this as a function trips off another really aggressive phase of AV receiver pricing, if you're an AV receiver manufacturer, if you've got the opportunity to sell speakers, which, let's face it, do make people more money than receivers do even at the best of times, it's not going to do you any harm. So I can fully understand why they're doing it.
Right, okay. Steve, you've now heard both these systems. These amplifiers are coming onto the market. What is the cheapest AVR with Dolby Atmos? Do we know?
It's about, I think they're going to be a sort of 500-600 quid mark. So kind of, I think, relatively cheap.
Okay, and then you got to add, 4 speakers? So either speakers on the ceiling or upward
don't forget Onkyo, aren't they throwing in 4 speakers?
Yeah, but that's just a promotion that runs for a month or 2. So let's take that out of the equation first of all. So we're looking at 500 or 600 quid to upgrade your AVR if you want, but that's just the cheapest one.
Yeah.
So if you're an AV enthusiast,
there will be, in fairness, there will be some manufacturers, I believe Pioneer, definitely Onkyo, and possibly some others who are going to do firmware updates for some of the previous receivers to make them Atmos capable. So there might be even possibly a free upgrade there. So it's worth considering. Yeah. But yeah, I see your point. You're going to be spending at least $1,000, aren't you?
Right. So you're spending at least $1,000. You've had both systems. Is it worth spending $1,000?
I think the answer to that question is whether it depends entirely upon whether you're going to get decent support from the studios. Because I definitely enjoyed. I thought the idea of Atmos appeals to me. The demo of Star Trek Into Darkness that I heard, particularly in the home cinema demo room, I thought was really good. Again, that was a more immersive sensation to the sound. I did enjoy it. I think I'd certainly be interested to do. I'm sure a lot of AV enthusiasts would be. The question is going to be who's going to deliver the content, because the thing that Dolby obviously didn't mention but did occur to me at the time is that almost every Blu-ray that you buy, with the exception of Paramount,
Master Audio,
uses TTS HD Master Audio. And it's only, I believe, I could be wrong here, but certainly for my movie collection, I had a quick look actually earlier, flicking through a few, apart from Paramount, who do use True HD as their sort of default sound format. Almost all the others use DTS. So it's going to be obviously Paramount are going to support it. I mean, that's Star Trek's a Paramount movie. They wouldn't actually confirm who would be releasing discs and when, but I think it's a safe bet that either IFA or CEDIA, there'll be announcements, and I should imagine that the first ones will be Paramount movies, because they've got things like Transformers that was done with Atmos. They've got the Star Trek with Atmos, so that could be the obvious discs to launch it with.
The other thing there as well, though, Steve, is that we could be double dipping again as well. So
absolutely. But having said that, if I could get an Atmos mix, because they were talking about the Atmos mix for Gravity, and it sounded absolutely stunning, because that film has got such directional audio in it all the time. The idea of object-based sound really, really works for that kind of film. So the idea of an Atmos soundtrack on Gravity is actually quite appealing to me. And again, that's dependent on Warner Brothers supporting it, but they certainly have been making films in Atmos. They did Gravity, as I said. Also, I think Godzilla, that's a Warner's movie. So there's there's certainly plenty. There's about 120 movies already made with Atmos soundtrack, so there is plenty of content out there if the studios are prepared to support it. Do we want to double dip? Not ideally, but I think in certain cases I could make an exception. I would definitely double dip on Gravity if it was available with an Atmos soundtrack.
Right, okay, and final question for you, Steve, is are you going to bolt speakers to your ceiling, or are you going to go for the upward firing?
Bolt speakers to the ceiling because I can.
Okay.
I still think that's my preference. Whilst they worked extremely well, given the option, I'll go for the proper approach.
Okay, but is it the proper approach?
Because
this is the thing.
Because I can.
Right, Mr. Botwright, what's your thoughts on this? I know we've gone over Atmos quite a few times now, but now that Steve's heard it, he's given his opinions. What do you think?
It sounds interesting. I still don't know that many people who've gone to 7.1.
That's very true.
I still know most people stick with 5.1. I've known people who've gone to 7.1, have played with it for a while, have either kind of rearranged a room at, someone else's behest, or they've just decided that perhaps the extra speakers aren't necessary, and then they just seem to stick. 5.1 just seems to be that nice round number. You can get away with that amount of speakers in a kind of multi-purpose room. You can hide them away. You can be clever with how they're arranged. It's not too intrusive. And yeah, I just think that most people tend to stick around that number for a reason.
Yeah, well,
in the same way that at a given point, we will hit a point where people say, in fact, actually, I don't want a bigger screen. I think we are heading towards that point, even if we do get 4K as prevalent and with content on tap. There does come a point where families tend to say that's a bit too much.
Well, I mean, I've got a dedicated room and it's 5.1, and that's basically because with the layout I thought it was a waste of time having the speakers behind to make up 7.1, so I've stuck with 5.1 with 4 subwoofers. That's the system that works best in that room, and it's the one which gives me the level of performance that I'm happy with to watch movies when I get a chance to watch movies. So I get that point. I also get the point that it certainly ever since I started buying AV receivers 20 odd years ago, Ed, there is one company who have always had effects speakers.
This is true.
Extra connections for effects speakers, and in that 20 years I've never used the extra channels. I mean, I've got an Onkyo amp that's 4 or 5 year old now, which has the ability to do width and height and all the rest of it, and I've never bothered with that.
Well, no. There does appear to be. I mean, I've bemoaned this before, that confronted by an unwillingness for people to stick more speakers in their rooms, the approach by AV receiver manufacturers has just been to offer them different ways of sticking more speakers into the same room. But I don't know. It shouldn't stop innovation. And as I say, they have at least. I think they've partially learned a lesson. There is the upward firing solution.
I think that's the genius part.
Yeah, that's the important one.
That's the one.
And there is, but without stopping there being a purist solution as well for the withers of this world. So I think that's quite clever. And I don't know. I think with present speakers, half the blame, maybe not half the blame, the end of people going into a bricks and mortar store to buy these products and being and therefore having the possibility of being demoed height and present speakers basically shot the idea in the foot. If you're just buying it on the internet, are you going to take a punt? You're probably not. There are solutions out there for people that don't want to get indulge in some high level masonry. So it could be worth
a tricky bit. Actually, there is a tricky bit with ceiling mounting the speakers. There is one issue, and that is
string.
No, depending on where you're going to put them, because obviously the ideal thing would be to use one of the joists in the ceiling to drill into to put your speaker up there. But clearly, the joist might not be in the correct place. I think, didn't we talk about using a piece of wood and brackets last week?
Yeah.
Or maybe the week before. And that's my solution. That's what I'm going to do. Because talking to the guy, his name was JJ, nothing to do with JJ Abrams, in his job description, and it's on his business card, Dolby business card, is in evangelist. And he was, I said to him, where's the best place to put the speakers in? Overhead speakers. And he said, ideally, depending on where you're seated, and I'm about 2/3 of the way across the room from the screen. So He said, in that case, and you want the rear speakers sort of just behind the listening position, firing straight down. And you want the front speakers about a quarter of the way into the room and angled slightly towards the listener. So that's apparently what he's recommended for the overhead speakers. If you're thinking about doing it yourself, Ed, that's...
The only person who hasn't said anything on this subject is Mr. Hodge. And I find that interesting because, Hodge, if you don't mind me saying so, I think you actually live in probably the type of house which represents the vast majority of the population of this country, and that's a tenement with its challenges with space. So how do you deal with it?
It's big enough, but it's a really awkward shape, my room. 5.1 is near impossible apart for one sitting position. So I can hook it up so it sounds good where I sit, but it sounds shocking anywhere else in the room. So it's, even with the upfirers, it would be, I don't think I could get it in other than, when everyone else is out and I'm sat in the armchair bang in front of the telly, and I can position the speakers behind me exactly where I want.
Or you end up knocking through walls and making...
Knocking through walls. Oh, if it doesn't stick up by blue tack, I'm not interested, to be quite honest. That's the extent of my DIY.
Yeah, I must admit, my DIY is blue tack and super glue.
Yeah.
main tools of trade for me.
I can't be bothered with DIY. It ultimately, in the same way that all the stuff that's got to be done in the lounge to get all of the equipment in. Am I doing any of it myself? Am I bollocks? I'm going to get someone that has a keen and developed understanding of power tools in, and they're going to do a proper job, and I shall hand them money, and I shall momentarily be sad about handing them money, but then nothing will fall off. I won't have drilled through a gas main or any of that stuff, and it will just be done.
That noise in the background was me just ripping up the idea of the DIY home cinema videos.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I'd be quite happy to film a professional doing the work. And then maybe he could come to fix my washing machine and we could degenerate into something altogether more horrifying. But
I think, Mark, I hope you don't mind me making this point, but your room, or certainly the layout, is the traditional layout of your tenement. And the vast majority of UK homes are like that. So how the hell are you going to fit a system like that in?
I just couldn't. It's unfeasible. It's just totally unfeasible for me, other than in one listening position, which would be fine, but it would make the room look a complete sight, really. It's just not going to happen in Shea Hodgkinson, I'm afraid. I'm just thinking about from the perspective of people I know and friends. I can't see any of them being interested, bar one, who's a good friend of mine, but that was only because I would talk him into doing it, and he's quite handy with his DIY skills. So when he built his own house and put speakers in the ceiling and all this kind of stuff, so I'm going to try and talk him into it.
I love the way that you equate those two things. He built his own house. That's seriously impressive. Then put speakers in the ceiling. To be honest,
at the same time, while he was building his house,
yeah.
no, that was part of the design. So I'm saying he could and probably will do it for me if I ask him. So he can be my test bed. I'll get him to do it, and I can go around here with all the stuff.
Interesting, Mark mentions that, because I guess in-ceiling speakers are nothing new. They've been around for ages.
Yeah.
No. And my experience of in-ceiling sort of rears or side speakers has been that they don't work very well because obviously they're in the wrong place.
It really depends. It depends on the person that's put them in and how the room's been designed. Because I've been in some rooms where the speakers have been hidden, but it's been designed by somebody that actually knows what they're doing, and it sounded really, really good. So I guess that comes down to who it is that's putting it in and the brands that they're using and so on. I mean, it's no surprise that KEF have just released a line of THX certified in-ceiling speakers at the same time as the announced Atmos.
Now you see, it's interesting you bring up THX. THX is the gold standard in how Dolby should not go about licensing the Atmos upward firing stuff. And I say that completely. I'm not being facetious. It really needs to be a far more open standard than THX. They simply need to describe what the speaker should seek to do, and then make no other specifications as to crossover points, any of the rest of it. They should just leave speaker manufacturers to get on with it, because that's the way forward, not THX. Absolutely adamant about that.
We need to move things on. We're running out of time.
Yeah, we've been incredibly on topic for an uncomfortably long period of time.
Let's move things on.
Please?
Okay, so that's Dolby Atmos, Steve had his opportunity to listen to that. We're expecting the first bits of kit to come through for review soon. And I know that Steve's getting somebody in who knows DIY and is going to put his speakers up in time for that to happen. Is that right, Steve?
Yep. Yeah, my dad. My dad doesn't know this yet, by the way, but he's about to find out.
Right, Ask the Idiots. We need to be quick because we are running out of time. We've gone over time talking about the last two subjects. So I'm just looking through these lists, and I'm going to pick just one of them this week, and we can carry the other one over to next week. So I'm going to go to David Stevens, DTS Man, on Twitter. And what piece of kit do you still own, even if you don't use it, because you just couldn't get rid of it? And I'll answer this first by saying that I used to be somebody who would hoard stuff, and then about 10 years ago I decided to have a big clear out, and a lot of my old kit went, along with my Laserdisc player and my Laserdiscs. Those were the things that I would probably have kept hold of if I hadn't have gotten rid of them, and it's one of the biggest regrets. But I don't have anything. So that's me. Let's go to Hodge.
I'm pretty much everything. I can't. I'm very bad at throwing things away. So in the loft, amongst other things, amongst countless boxes and stuff, I've got two 14-inch CRT TVs that will never be used. Well, in fact, one of them doesn't work. Probably should have checked that out years ago. I just can't bear to. One of them I had for around about 20 years from being a teenager, and it still works, still going strong.
If you were a teenager, it'd be longer than that, would it not?
I don't know, maybe 25 years. I was a teenager then, wasn't I? 19, yeah.
Has it got the wood finish?
Yeah, wood finish. Ferguson.
Nice.
Beautiful. It's I just can't bring myself to throw it away. So that'll stay in there until the missus tells me it's got to go. I've got a VHS player that will never see any more action, but that's staying. And just tying on the other DTS Man question that we weren't going to answer, but I've got about 6 bags worth full of cables that I will probably never ever use again. But I've always got this nagging feeling at the back of my mind I'm going to need one of them, so I daren't chuck any. So I'm a hoarder, and I'm not proud of it.
Okay, Mr. Botwright.
I was going to say, when you say couldn't get rid of, are we talking as in you can't bear to part with it, or
Yes.
it's actually crap that you can't get rid of?
No, well, I suppose you could go with the crap that nobody else wants.
It's a bit of both.
I've got both. I've got an old hard disk drive DVD recorder that's still got stuff on that I haven't seen. And unfortunately, the problem now is the remote has been unused for a suitable amount of time. That now the buttons have got that weird kind of sticky nature to them, so they kind of stick down. So it's like kind of a weird kind of Krypton Factor game or something, trying to just select something on that. In the loft, I think there's a 9-foot projector screen, which I'm fairly sure I got from some kind of like a local church group or something. The bloke was just happy to get rid of it, and I paid money for it. But that's the kind of thing.
Did you have a projector, Mark?
Yeah, I did, and it was one of those things where I just thought I don't want to drill into the wall and put up a screen and then find that I want to change the room round. So it was a case of it's a really handy way of just kind of finding out where things should go. Other than that, it's kind of things like last generation consoles, PS3, 360. I should probably get rid of them, but since I kind of started getting stuff digitally and it's stuff stored on a hard drive that isn't going to be backwards compatible, you can't just play it on new consoles, so you're kind of tied to this stuff now. I think there's going to be a time, as gadgets progress, where we will be almost tied by our collection of content that we've got stuck on some hard drive.
I just know what kind of reply I'm going to get here. Ed?
Where to begin?
It's a long and distinguished list, isn't it?
Edited highlights. Pioneer DV919 Laserdisc / DVD player, which is not a small thing to keep stowed.
Is that the gold effect, champagne gold effect thing?
You know that.
Yeah.
Is there any other colour? Then I've rather smaller, and just because it's a minor work of art, I have a Sony MDS EPS 11 mini disc Walkman. It's the first playback only mini disc Walkman, and it has an eject mechanism which was never used on any other mini disc player, and I just love it. And I have no mini disc left. I just can't bear to part with it because it's splendid. there's an Electro Compagnette stereo amplifier, which is actually now very nearly dead and would need a complete service to get back into life. But I can't bring myself to part with that because I love it. And then one for Mr. Botwright, not actually in this house, my own house, but lurking in my parents' loft is a Net Erosi. The black edit your own games PlayStation 1 thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I never had the skill, talent or application to do any of the editing things, but it was a black PlayStation 1 and it looked really cool. And that's still lurking in a box in my parents' loft. So I don't know if someone, I don't know what to do with that. I don't even know if it's worth anything. But yeah, that's another. I at the same time I got rid of any number of other games consoles, but just held on to that because I don't know if it ever had a proper UK release. So I figure it might be quite rare.
I bet it probably would be.
Oh, and then also just not on an AV sense, but I think this is quite amusing. You might find this quite amusing. Many years ago, I was bored. At school, and I filled in a competition to win a mountain bike in a friend's magazine about mountain biking, and I won a Trek Y22 full suspension uber bastard mountain bike. Now I don't like bikes, so that has effectively lived in my parents' garage since the day I won it. I think I've taken it out twice. It's a time warp. I fully intend to hold on to that until I'm at least 50 or 60, and then I will basically put an absolutely as new mountain bike up for sale and see if some museum wants it or something. So yeah.
What was the BMX bike that was used in ET? Was it Kawawara? Is that how you pronounce it? The red and white one with the. I always wanted one of them, and I think I would still buy one if I could find one.
Oh God! This is what the internet, other than pornography, and obviously the UK's leading AV forum, middle-aged men buying things for nostalgia purposes is what the internet is all about.
Yeah, totally.
Because you couldn't own it the first time round.
Yeah, it would have to have the trick nuts on it, and what was the plastic wheels called with the Skyways or something like that, and red line crank and pedals and
spokey dokies.
I mean, a friend of mine has just spent about £65 on a boxed, mint, never played with, John Player special Lotus Skeletrix car.
I love that car.
When he was a kid, he wanted one and he couldn't have it. And now, and it's like, have you got a Skeletrix tractor gun? I will do. It's like, yes.
Yeah, actually, that's a good buy. I love the John Player, the black and gold colouring and everything. It was so cool.
It must be said that, I mean, whilst I
it made me want to smoke cigarettes.
Yeah, well, I fully endorsed the removal of tobacco sponsorship from sport. It must be said that, let's face it, Formula One cars in tobacco livery, the Marlboro McLarens, if it had meant they continued to, Ayrton Senna would have won more races, I'd have been smoking 40 a day as a 9-year-old.
Well, let's not forget that for my generation, we could go in the shop and buy cigarette sweets.
Yeah, totally. I remember that.
Smoke.
I remember that. The little white candy things that used to. And
they still get candy sticks.
They're wrapped in edible paper, and you sit there and pretend to smoke them with your mates.
Yeah.
In the same way that, I mean, let's face it, racing cars have gone through a whole tradition of being sponsored by. I mean, my favourite were those BMW touring cars that were sponsored by Jägermeister. You know, that most suitable thing to endorse to driving fast on a racetrack, something that makes you go blind and mad. Brilliant. Love it. But cracking livery.
Well, you see, really I think it's one of these things as well. I mean, Ed, you're fast approaching your 40s. I hate to bring it up, but yeah.
I'm in a good place with it, mate. Don't worry.
But when you get to this point, I think there's just something about I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy what I couldn't have as a kid.
Yeah, definitely.
That I've always wanted, and
furthermore, the internet makes it so easy as well.
Yeah,
really does. Yeah. You know,
and when you were a kid, £100 was like £1 million. But now, you know, you get to the point where £100 is, well, I'm quite prepared to throw £100 away on that.
Does the internet make it easier just because it's at the end of a kind of search engine, Or is it that you wouldn't buy this kind of thing if you had to walk into a shop and buy
could
it?
you see me walking into a BMX shop and buy?
There's an element of that.
I would like a test drive, please, sir.
You can't walk into the shop, Mark, after a good 6 or 7 hours of competitive beer drinking, which, let's face it, does remove the wallet inhibitors at the best of times anyway. And
buying a rally chopper,
and then obviously the nature of just I mean, there's only a fight. I mean, I can't remember what I was looking at the other day. There was a website of mint in box Action Force and GI Joe toys, and to be fair, they have to be collated in a limited number of locations, and then people access it via the internet, because you couldn't really probably justify the overheads of opening a vintage Action Force shop, could you? I mean, whilst it would be the coolest shop in the world, it probably wouldn't work.
I don't know. If you owned the shop, I was always amazed that when you get a shop that just sells things like trophies.
Yeah, you generally find they're in quite low overhead areas, don't you? Or they're owned by someone who's about 6,000 years old.
There's one not far from me that he sells Hornby trains. That's all he sells, and he's been in business for the last 20 odd years.
I salute that. I mean, I have to say that one of the advantages, obviously, whilst I would have been, delighted to have a child, full stop. The fact that I do have a son, I had a Skeletrix as a kid. I didn't really have a model railway, so I'm kind of keen on the idea of, even if he's not keen on it, I'll use him as an excuse to just buy one for the sheer hell of it.
I had an awesome model railway, some really not Hornby, but can't remember the manufacturer now, but they were all metal construction. Really gorgeous period trains and everything. And my dad sold them all behind my back.
He was probably hoping that you'd leave home.
Well, I had left home. I'd gone to university, and he said, "Oh, I cleaned I cleaned out the loft. I sold your railway stuff." I thought, "Oh, thanks. That was mine." And also, I threw out all those 2000 ADs. I had 2000 AD from issue 1 in mint condition. They were worth some serious money. I was livid.
Well, I've still got all my Star Wars figures. I just remembered this conversation has just brought it.
Was that back, Steve, when you just lived up the road from Johnny Depp?
I do live near Johnny Depp. But no, this was long before my friendship with Johnny Depp started. Me and Depp still go back a long way.
Who have I missed out on this?
You haven't asked me yet.
Have I not asked you? It's probably because you speak the most on this podcast, Steve. It's just switch off every time you open your mouth.
Oh, I'll ask Hodge then.
You already asked me. You obviously switched off when I opened my mouth.
What was the original question?
Actually, what are we talking about now? Is this the throwing things away?
Go on then, Steve. What's the one bit of kit that you still own?
If you'd asked me this question a couple of years ago, I'd have had a long list of stuff that I had knocking around. But I flogged it all on the classifieds. I used to have like you, Phil, Laserdisc player and all my Laserdiscs. Couldn't part with those, but eventually I did because it was just taking up space and I never used them. I had a mini disc player that I couldn't part with, but then eventually thought, well, I'll never really use it. A couple of CD players, Blu-ray players, projectors. I had a whole pile of stuff that I was just taking up space. But now I've had to clear out. And to be honest, I don't think there's anything else. There was nothing.
Is there anything you've got rid of that you've really regretted getting rid of?
Get rid of it. I kind of still regret getting rid of the Laserdisc player. I wish I hadn't done that now. Even though I knew I wouldn't use it. I've just invested so much time.
I know. I'm the same.
At the very least, I'm secondary to Laserdisc. It was already pretty much dead by the time I bought anything. So I never bought anything at the eye-watering prices that you guys did. If I'd invested at the level that you guys had, you could bet your bottom dollar that I wouldn't have shifted any of it. Just the sheer emotional. I spent a bloody fortune on that. I couldn't get a shot of it.
Okay, so this will probably get edited down, but at the minute that's 52 minutes of hardware. and
people say we just muck about.
Yeah, and most of it was on message, so there you go. Gamesy's next. Games podcast went out last week. What did you discuss on that? And I believe Gamescom's now finished.
Gamescom is now finished.
Yeah, sorry, I spoke.
He adjusts his tie as he says that. Yes, Gamescom.
You wear a tie for the podcast.
Oh, of course I don't. Don't even wear trousers.
I'm wearing a cravat and a velvet jacket myself.
Yeah, that was the kind of big topic of the day. But obviously, we hadn't really discussed the Destiny beta also. So because we had no podcast in July. But yeah, basically, for those who haven't really caught what went on with Gamescom, we're going to have a couple of little roundups hitting the site. I believe the first one hit the site today about the Sony games that James got hands-on with and which he's looking forward to. Really, the kind of big story of the whole show was Xbox exclusive for the next Tomb Raider title. Slightly vague wording to that one, holiday 2015 exclusive to Xbox, which leaves various get out of jail free cards. Is it just for holiday 2015 that it's exclusive? Is it strictly speaking exclusive to Xbox as a brand, or Xbox One? Or now it turns out that in fact it's going to be on the 360 as well, and it is basically just a timed exclusive. Phil Spencer, head of Xbox, has admitted that the deal has a duration. So yeah, it's now slowly filtering out that it is fairly sound business. They've bought up something in the sense that they've basically thrown money at Square Enix to get them to stop making it on a rival platform, so they have a game to put out against Uncharted 4.
Well, that told us.
Yeah, well, that's basically it. If you want any more, listen to the Games podcast.
I was delighted to see you were playing Quap, or however you pronounce that.
Yes, indeed, I was playing Quap. I was the king of Quap.
The king of Quap.
That's marvelous. It's a game that if you are, through either religious or other reasons, a teetotal human being, it's an amazing insight into trying to do anything whilst unbelievably drunk. It's very useful. It's like an inebriation simulator. Fantastic.
So the Games podcast is out. So you go and download that once you've finished listening to this. And that wraps up games. Coming up next is movies. So let's crack on with movies. And what was at the cinema, Steve?
It would have been Expendables 3, but unfortunately I didn't get to the cinema this week.
All right,
so out.
All right, so Kaz's review's up on the site. Go and read that.
Yeah, Kaz has reviewed it, so he's managed it.
That was the shortest What's at the Cinema we've done.
Lots of action stars in a big film, lots of explosions apparently. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. You didn't have to go and see it. Blu-rays released next week. What are they, Steve?
We've got The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which I have seen at the cinema and kind of enjoyed, although I felt it suffered from kitchen sink syndrome, where they just seem to throw everything in the kitchen sink in there. They had like 3 villains, and they obviously learned nothing from Spider-Man 3. Felt a bit too much. It wasn't an awful film, probably better than Spider-Man 3, but it just felt a bit too much. And it hasn't done that well at the box office either. So now Sony have suddenly scuppered a lot of plans they had for Spider-Man 3 and 4 and the Sinister Six and all this other stuff, and they're kind of recalculating what they're going to do. I mean, let's be honest, the only reason they're making these films is so they can retain the rights and not have to give them back to Marvel. But anyway, it comes out on Blu-ray next week. I'm sure it'll look and sound amazing. You get a choice of 2D or 3D, although unlike Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man, this was not shot natively in 3D, so it will be a conversion. But it's not a bad film. It's enjoyable in places, and I think the cast are good. I just felt that they kind of tried to cram too much into one movie. But worth checking out if you're a Spider-Man fan. Transcendence didn't do very well at the box office and didn't do very well critically. And I was ambivalent at first. I liked the ideas behind it. I liked the ambition of the film. I think that it was trying to, ask serious questions and be sort of big ideas, sci-fi, which you haven't had recently. And in that sense, it was very interesting. I think the majority of the cast were good. I'm kind of getting a bit sick of Johnny Depp, to be honest. It's a bit of a one-trick pony these days. But Wally Pfister directed it, who had worked as DP for Christopher Nolan. It looked gorgeous. He shot it on film. He actually color timed it chemically rather than a digital intermediate. So it's a very attractive movie. It looks great. I'm sure it'll be a fantastic looking Blu-ray. I just felt the structure of the story was a bit flawed. And there were elements about it that, it just didn't quite deliver on its promise. But having said that, I still think it's an interesting movie. I think it was slightly hard done by the critics. And personally, I actually bought it. I bought it on Blu-ray because, I thought, well, I'll give it a second go because actually I think it's better than I remember it being. And at least it tried to be, about something interesting and try and bring back that idea of big science fiction ideas. And so for that alone, I think it's worth checking out. And there's Locke, which is Tom Hardy in a car. The whole film is him in a car. So if you're,
Kaz would like that then.
No, I
Tom
watched
Hard-
it. Now, do you know, I thought that was a genuinely excellent film. I really enjoyed it. And I went with my wife and I just thought I had no expectations at all. I thought it was bloody marvellous. And it's thanks for reminding me that's out, because you know what, I might actually go and buy that. Really good. Really, I mean, obviously not the thing that needs an Atmos soundtrack, not the thing that needs a soundtrack other than dialogue, but it's really clever. And it's a demonstration that Tom Hardy can just act, not necessarily, you know, either bulk up to some sort of hilarious level or wear a mask or something like that. I think that's a really, really good film.
Okay, so there you go. That's the Blu-rays that are out next week. So, Mr. Hodgkinson, Netflix 4K, is it better than Blu-ray?
Short answer. Long answer. Not a lot in it. I'll be honest. I spent a lot of time going backwards and forwards between, just as it turned out, one episode of House of Cards Series 2 for close scrutiny, because it's just such a time-consuming business, and the fact that it was so close, I was focusing on tiny bits of portions of the picture, then going backwards and forwards, and just trying to see any differences. And it's tiny. In terms of the video, you've got just some slight extra texture, a little bit more nuance to the lighting, but sheer resolution, you're going to be struggling to see the difference with your average Blu-ray. As things stand, of course, this is it's quite heavily compressed, the 4K content from Netflix, so it's a maximum of 20 megabits per second, which is half of a really good Blu-ray. Obviously, the compression codec is better, but I think we're going to need the physical format before the resolution differences become massively apparent. And this was on a 65-inch. I mean, I used 3 TVs throughout the process, but even on a 65-inch TV from about 5 foot, it's difficult to see a resolution difference between a good Blu-ray as House of Cards.
Are there other benefits though, such as does the picture look better in terms of
it's slight, there's a slight sheen and a pizzazz. As I say, it's more the darker scenes with the sort of some streetlit scene from the credits that I used. I put a photo in the article, and the tarmac's just got that little bit of texture. The actual quality of the light coming out of the street lamps is a bit more natural. There's a tiny little upgrade there as things stand. I think things will improve if and when we get a physical format, or if and when we can start streaming it at higher bit rates. But if this is the future of streaming, then I can definitely live with it, because it's amazing, the quality. Just firing up the Netflix app, and you've got the entirety of Breaking Bad, the entirety of House of Cards, just to flick in, it buffers and it's there within 2 or 3 seconds on a decent internet connection, and the quality, you'd be hard pressed to fault it. There was hardly anything in the way. Well, I couldn't see anything in the way of compression artifacts or posterization problems. It's stunning. It's stunning because it's streamed and it's better than Super HD. Yeah. And it's a tiny little upgrade over Blu-ray at the moment. But as I say, if that's the future of streaming, then I can certainly live with it.
Certainly, when I had my sit-down Q&A session with Netflix earlier in the year, the big point here is sound. Sound, it seems to be the thing that's been forgotten about in terms of streaming. But Netflix really confident that they are going to bring high definition sound to the party as well, which could be quite interesting then, if 4K looks as good as that. Which, if that's streamed 4K and it looks as good as a Blu-ray.
Yeah, I'd say it would look as good, if not slightly better.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty stunning state of affairs, really.
So add in high definition sound. And,
you're onto an absolute winner. I mean, you can get 5.1, which should be Dolby Digital Plus, through the Netflix apps. But yeah,
Dolby have said that they think they'll be able to deliver Atmos via streaming at some point.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. As network infrastructures improve and the compression codecs improve, then I don't see why that wouldn't be possible in the relatively near future, which would be quite exciting.
Okay, so your article is up on the front page if people are interested in finding out a little bit more and asking some questions and so on. There is a comments section to that article as well, so go and have a read and put your questions in there. Or you could do an Ask the Idiots via Twitter, hashtag Ask the Idiots, and ask your questions regarding Netflix 4K or Dolby Atmos, which are the two big things that we've been talking about tonight. So just before we wrap up on proceedings, a little bit of news that crept out today. The rumours have been going about for months now, and we discussed it in the podcast about 2 weeks ago, which was the 4K masters of the original Star Wars trilogy. There is now almost confirmation that it's coming to Blu-ray, the original Star Wars trilogy coming to Blu-ray at some point either this year or early next year in the run-up to Episode 7.
So just say, when you say the original Star Wars trilogy, you mean the theatrical versions?
Yes.
Unaltered, unspecialised.
Yes, unspecialised, yes, and George molested.
And George molested, yeah, exactly. And that's, that for me is all I want. I just want the Star Wars I saw when I was a kid. Warts and all the crappy effects and dodgy mats and everything else. I don't care. I just want that movie in the best possible quality on Blu-ray for me to watch and enjoy.
No, is that
they can do other versions as well. I don't care. Put that on the disc as well. They're fine, but just give me the option. Don't give me a non-anamorphic DVD made from a Laserdisc transfer from 20 years ago, and then that's just taking the piss, isn't it? So thank God for Disney, who clearly have seen sense in the sense that I think they do appreciate restoring and looking after their back catalogue, and clearly they've also realised it'll be a great way of drumming up interest before Episode 7 comes out.
It's a real money spinner. It'd probably pay for half the budget of the new film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently though it has been. The reason, obviously Lucas was going on, has been saying for years, like, the original negatives doesn't exist anymore. You can't see it, which we all knew was bullshit.
But it does, because it's in the American Institute of whatever it is, and it has to be the original. That's kept
what he wasn't
storage.
prepared to do, I think, was he wasn't prepared to spend the money to do a proper restoration of the original camera negative of Star Wars and Empire and Jedi, and particularly Star Wars, because obviously the more successful a film is, the more prints they have to strike and the more damage that there is to the negative, and that's why it was in pretty poor state. Now apparently Disney have been doing this for quite some time now, and it's taken a long time because there was serious damage to the negative and they had to fix it. But it's expensive. That's the thing, and I think he was just tight ass. Look at the Blu-rays they did put out. It was the old HD transfers from a few years ago. Things changed quickly.
Yeah, they sucked big time, as did the extras. And normally, Lucasfilm stuff would be excellent in terms of extras. I remember that, like the prequel stuff that came out, the behind-the-scenes stuff on that was superb. Really, really good stuff. Yeah. But there was none of that on the box sets.
The documentary on the Phantom Menace, the beginning, I think it's called. Hour-long documentary behind the scenes is brutally honest about the making of that film. There's whole sequences where you can see them thinking, we've screwed this up. Kid doesn't work, he can't act. There's the pacing wrong. There are quite honest meetings in that film where you can see, them worrying about the film quite rightly, as it turned out. So yeah, you're right, Phil. There have been some excellent extras in the past, but the Blu-ray box set that they put out was shockingly poor.
Yeah, really was. So I know that obviously you're excited, I'm excited, I'm going to go and buy this.
Absolutely. Day one.
Absolutely no-brainer. Ed?
We'll see. Probably not a day one release, but that's because it's not so much a lack of interest in the thing, it's because I've almost certainly bought something else that I need to pay for. As I explained to you at the start of this podcast, I've got two men, one of whom smells a bit, putting my kitchen together.
You paid for two men.
I paid for two men. Yeah.
That's just greed.
So yeah, it's more a case that I'll have probably bought records and I'll need to wait until I see it on a screaming deal. But I'm pleased that it's happening. I'm pleased because I can sense the actual joy with you two, and that if you're happy.
Well, can you not get the massive sigh of relief from the internet? Can you not just feel it?
To be honest, as I say, today I have mostly been doing. I've been on the internet, but not on the fun part of the internet. So that sounds wrong as well, doesn't it? No, I've been head down today. I'm very pleased that it's going to happen, and we'll take it from there. Okay. I'm annoyed that it's probably affecting the value of my laser discs.
And Mr. Botwright, any joy from you?
Yeah, there's joy. But it won't be day one. I'll wait until
day 2.
Yeah, well, no, I'll wait until, shall we see, how much whinging there is, whether anything else has been screwed up.
All right, okay. So the first podcast after the release, then you'll make your mind up. Yeah. Fair enough. Right, so we have run out of time. Mr. Hodgkins had to disappear to mind his kids, and it's time for us to disappear as well for another week. But if you do have any questions for Ask the Idiots, then the best way to send them is via Twitter at AVForums with the hashtag Ask the Idiots. You can ask us anything you like on any subject whatsoever to do with AV or not to do with AV. And if we can answer it, we'll answer it, and if we can't answer it, we'll still have a bloody good go at it. So all I need to do now is thank Steve Withers.
You suck the sweat off a dead man's balls.
Mark Botwright.
Maybe go downtown and try to find a Vietnamese man named Phil.
And Ed Selley.
How would you describe your testicles?
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmark avforums.com for latest news, reviews and video, and why not leave us a rating on iTunes if you enjoyed the show. I'm Phil Hinton, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.